Okay, so once you actually understand the unit circle, all of this practice just makes it kind of like come together a little bit more, because it's all about just drawing these angles using and understanding radian measure. So here it says, how can you use radian measure to sketch an angle? Suppose an angle measures 4 pi over 3 radians. Its intercepted arc on the unit circle is also 4 pi over 3 radians. So this says that the distance around the circumference, right, the arc here, if this is 4 pi over 3 radians, then the angle measures 4 pi over 3 radians. That's why back in the last video we worked with circumference, because whatever distance around the arc it is, that's what we use to represent the angle measure too. So let's remember, here's 0, right? Here's 2 pi over 3. Oh, just 2 pi. Sorry, here's 0 and 2 pi. One time around is 2 pi. I cut 2 pi in half, brings me pi over here. I cut pi in half, brings me pi over 2, and I cut in half between pi and 2 pi, and I get 3 pi over 2. Whoops. And I need to draw 4 pi over 3 radians. What makes this tricky? Anyone want to guess what makes this tricky? Is that I don't have common denominators. And like I said in the last video, common denominators make this all so much easier. So let's go ahead and bring my current measurements in a denominator of 3, okay? Because that's what I'm trying to draw here. I jump right to this pi because that's the easiest thing, right? I could change this pi to 3 pi over 3, right? Because now I know 3 pi over 3 is the same thing as pi, right? Because the 3's are going to cancel. Now let's go ahead and do 2 pi, right? With a denominator of 3, my numerator has to be 6 pi, right? Because simplify 6 over 3 gives me 2 pi, right? So 6 pi over 3 is the same thing as 2 pi. Well, now I realize, where am I going to find 4 pi over 3? Here's my initial side, right? 4 pi over 3 is going to be just past 3 pi over 3. And that's all I have to do. I have to give it a rough sketch. Here's my angle, 4 pi over 3, right? That's all it is. Once you realize where all those other measurements fall, it's easy to realize where the angles fit in. Okay, common denominators help a whole bunch. And it's a rough sketch, doesn't need to be exact. I mean, and you can also think about it. Halfway is going to be 3 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, 5 pi over 3 would be here, and there's 6 pi over 3, right? Here would be 5 pi over 3. So it just fits in. Let's take a look at another one. We need all the practice, right? So let's take a look here at 7 pi over 6. I can draw in what I know, right? 0, halfway around is pi, all the way around is 2 pi, a quarter of the way is pi over 2, 3/4 of the way is 3 pi over 2. It's tricky to draw 7 pi over 6 because I have no idea with the denominator of 6. So let's bring it to common denominator of 6. I always work with this pi. It kind of gives me a quick frame of reference really fast. So there's 6 pi over 6. I need 7 pi over 6. Well, it's going to be right past. 7 pi over 6 is right past 6 pi over 6. There's my initial side and my terminal side. Here is the angle measure, 7 pi over 6 radians. And you can keep going, like I can show you why. Oh gosh, this is horrible writing. I can talk more about this 7 pi over 6. Let's get a common denominator over here. With the denominator of 6, that'll be 12 pi, right? 12 pi over 6, because 12 divided by 6 gives me 2. Let's get one over here, 6. 2 to 6 multiplied by 3. 3 pi times 3 gives me 9 pi. So 9 pi over 6 is the same thing as 3 pi over 2. So it makes sense. 7 pi is going to be between 6 pi and 9 pi. Very rough sketch. Here's my angle. Let's do another one. 2 pi over 3, okay? I'm going to bring in what I know. Here's 0, halfway around is pi. Let's move this. And let's change it to red. All the way around is 2 pi. A quarter is pi over 2, and 3/4 would be 3 pi over 2. Like I have always done, I start with this pi. I recognize that, bring it to a common denominator. That's going to be 3 pi over 3. Well, I'm drawing 2 pi over 3, so it's going to be right before 3 pi over 3. And there's my angle. So fast, guys. Right here's 0. Obviously, 2 pi over 3 is going to be at that spot because 1 pi, cut it in thirds, right? Here's where 1 pi over 3 is going to be. If that's 0, it'll be 0, 1 pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 3 pi over 3. What about some negatives? So what about negative 3 pi over 4? Same thing with degrees. All we do with negatives is it just pushes it downwards, pushes it clockwise in a clockwise rotation. So now I have 0, negative pi over 2, negative pi, negative 3 pi over 2, negative 2 pi. Bring it to a common denominator. I start with my pi again. So I'm with the denominator of 4, so this is going to be negative 4 pi over 4. I can do the same thing with this guy, right? If I want a denominator of 4, it'll be negative 2 pi. So that is equal to negative pi over 2. So, and here's 0. Well, where's negative 3 pi over 4 going to fall? Right in between. Right? Negative 3 pi over 4 is right between 2 pi and 4 pi. There's my initial side, and there's my angle in radian measure. And if we need to, like that, maybe writing that out. Negative 3 pi over 4 radians. Okay? That's all it is. And you're going to try these in the practice today. A whole bunch of them. Practice sketching these angles in radian measure because it is new. I'm going to do one more actually. I would love to actually not even do this one. My last one of the day is going to be negative, let's do positive. 15 pi over 4. All right, I go to my unit circle. I get a common denominator. I realize this is already pretty big, right? I could go 4 pi over 4. And then what's this one going to be? 8 pi over 4. I could split that up. We know this is 2 pi over 4. I'm right, 0, 2 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4. This would be 6 pi over 4. And then bring me one full rotation around 8 pi over 4. That's the same as 2 pi, just not simplified. I need 15 pi over 4, so let's go around again. Okay, 8 pi over 4. I'm going to keep going, so this will be 10 pi over 4. I kind of just realized there's a pattern by adding 2 to get to the new quadrant, right? Because 2 plus 2, 4, plus 2, 6. So here will be 12 pi over 4. And I can simplify 12 pi over 4 and realize that's going to give me 3 pi, which would work, right? 0, 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. It just keeps on going, just like it would with degrees. Okay, here's 14 pi over 4. And then all the way to the beginning would bring me to 16 pi over 4, which simplifies to 4 pi, which would bring me back to 2 pi here. Okay, so now I know when I draw, I could draw my initial side. One time around is going to give me 8 pi. If I keep going, here gives me 14 pi over 4. 15 pi over 4 is going to be a little bit past that. But not all the way home because that'll be 16 pi over 4, okay? And this is the angle that I would draw to represent 15 pi over 4 radians, okay? More practice, the better you'll get. You guys got this. Awesome job.